Good afternoon. You're watching a documentary business webinar. My name is Dan Salerno. I'm a senior consultant and a veteran of some of the larger nonfiction brands. Today's topic is going to be selling natural history, opportunities and challenges. It's a really great time to have this discussion. We'll explain that a little bit more as we get started. But first, I want to introduce the guests that will be joining me. Peter Hamilton, the editor and publisher of Documentary Business, who is familiar to most of you, usually as the moderator. Today, he's ceded the moderating duties to myself, and he's going to sort of step in as a panelist and talk about a specific project within a larger context of our subject, natural history. And also joining us all the way from Leipzig, Germany, is Ann Olzmann, the managing director of Albatross World Sales. Ann is a returning guest. She was here for an earlier webinar a few months back, and we're thrilled to have her back. So welcome, Ann, and welcome, Peter.
Thanks, Dan. Great to have you here. Thanks for producing today.
Well, thanks. Why don't we go ahead and get started? So today's subject, as we saw in our opening slide, selling natural history, opportunities and challenges. And we thought it was a really good time for us to get together and talk about this as the summer is coming to an end here. Towards the end of August, beginning of September, we start to mark the beginning of the conference season, the traditional conference season. And we've got three big conferences that are coming up, focused specifically on natural history. So we thought this was a good time. Jackson Wild will be holding an event here, ironically, not too far from my back door in Silver Spring, Maryland, on September 5th. The Green Screen Festival, which focuses on natural history and is coming out of Northern Germany and is a rather large participant and an active member of that organization. And then finally, Wild Screen. Wild Screen is the trade. Wild Screen will be taking place once again in Bristol in October. And we thought it was a good time with the community sort of getting together to really sit down and talk about sort of where are we with natural history right now. We want to remind folks that the discussion around natural history is pretty wide, right? We can talk about the big projects and the smaller projects, the big budgets, the blue chip stuff, the character-driven stuff. For today, we wanted to focus a little bit more on what we're calling the mid-range projects, $200,000 to $500,000 US, that have really formed the backbone of our industry for decades now. Mm-hmm. And with that in mind, we wanted to start with you, Ann. And you've got a lot of experience selling the natural history genre into the marketplace, both at an acquisitions level, but also for the purposes of this discussion, pre-sales and co-pros and so forth. Talk a little bit about what you're seeing now in the landscape for what you're doing as you sort of get ready for this fall season.
Yes, well, I think you have to look at different angles. So speaking as a distributor of finished films, I think the times are actually really good in general. Like there's a huge demand for all kinds of wildlife and natural history programming across the world. And there are constantly new outlets who are buying. So I think overall we're in a very good spot. That being said, there are a lot of changes with the public broadcasters, especially, or broadcasters in general, but mainly for the public broadcasters, who tend, I mean, from our experience at least, tend to be a bit more hesitating towards buying one-offs or, single hours. I think like everybody's looking to save money and spend it all in packages and not necessarily the 1 hour. So I think there have been a lot of changes on the broadcaster side as well, where buyers are now buying documentaries in general and not just wildlife like it used to be. So we have to adapt to that situation a little bit, but at the same time, there are more outlets coming every month, basically. So we do have more clients. So that also means more work. That's true. So we have to do more deals for the same amount same amount of license fees that we in comparison with the past. But overall, I think distribution-wise, it's going really well. I think when it comes to production or co-production or financing, it's a bit trickier. I know that a lot of German producers work in that mid-range, and I think that's still doing okay mostly, but it's not easy because also the viewers disappear slowly to the online world, and the big for example, in Germany, we have this Monday primetime slot, and it hasn't been performing that well. So they're also looking for, new ways to attract the younger audience as well, moving a lot online. So I think there's a lot in movement at the moment. So that's something that is tricky. But overall, I think Germany is an okay market to be in for those medium-ranged films.
Well, that's good to hear, because as we know, the market is changing, and there's a lot of really rough stories out there, as we know. Can you focus a little bit, and I want to do this to sort of set up some of Peter's project that he wants to speak to specifically, I think is a really positive example. Speak a little bit about the U.S. market, both some of the challenges you found with the traditional buyers. And when I say traditional, I'm thinking of the Discoveries and the Nat Geos, the Disneys, and so forth. How has the market been going there, say, even relative to just 2-3 years ago?
I wonder where they are. No, but it is true. I mean, with a lot of those buyers have really disappeared a little bit on I don't know, maybe the big changes in the US landscape with all the mergers and acquisitions and people disappearing, coming in. Wildlife, is a genre that takes a long time to produce. So there are a lot of changes in the channels while this is being produced. So I think that's really an issue. And I think that's really tricky at the moment, for us at least. And I think they may be still more open to English speaking, or the BBC natural history people, or the ones that they have been working with over the last years. But besides, I think, they will rarely do a pre-buy. So sometimes they do still. It's not completely vanished, but it's getting really hard.
Well, one of the things that you mentioned there is the BBC or the UK-based producers, which have a very strong history and legacy in producing natural history, and their reputation is well deserved. But what it emphasizes is the value of relationships, right? And the importance of having these relationships over years and years. With that, I kind of want to maybe turn it to Peter a little bit here. Peter, you occasionally beyond your core consulting business, you do dip your toe into the executive producer role on occasion. You've got a project right now that's been going really well with you at the lead there. I wanted you to maybe talk about the project itself and why, the importance of the relationships that you developed that really made this project have an opportunity to go forward in a marketplace where it's a little bit more difficult to get these single hours into the US.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Thanks for inviting me on board your panel, and great to be with you, Anne. So I get involved in a very select passion project, something that really grabs my heart. A previous project I did was about the osprey species, and that did very well on PBS and worldwide. So I was pitched by Bruce Young, a Cape Town-based South African producer who'd taken my desktop documentaries course on pitching. And Bruce pitched me a show about a pangolin. It was called Korsha. The working title was Korsha, The Secret Life of a Pangolin. And it was a story of an orphan baby pangolin, which, as we know, the species is being hunted to extinction. And it was rescued and then successfully raised and rehabilitated. And it's raises lots of issues about conservation, but it's a big story about a specific animal. And secondly, there's a big character involved as well, and that's Lisa Highwood. She's the founder and CEO of the Tiki Highwood Foundation, which is focused on pangolin conservation. She's based in Harare, Zimbabwe. So Bruce introduced me to the production team composed of Diana Keem and the cinematographer Wayne DeLange, also in South Africa, and they struck me as really capable of delivering and of earning the faith of whoever became our partners. But I just saw one path for this particular project, just one path, and that was my dear friend, colleague, Ruth Berry, who is a cinematographer, writer, director, producer, an award winner who I've covered in documentary business. She has a very strong relationship with Terramata Studios, and Terramata, they're based in Austria, and Terramata in turn have a really strong relationship with PBS Nature in New York. And PBS Nature, of course, is the outstanding classic strand delivering high quality nature to American audiences. So I realized if I pitched Ruth and she didn't like it, it was all over. If Ruth pitched it to Terramata and they didn't like it, it was all over. And then if that did work, then Fred Kaufman from PBS Nature would need to like the project. And that sequence did actually work out. And Fred and Sabine Holzer, who leads Terramata Studios, agreed to co-fund the film. And we just finished shooting in Zimbabwe and we're in post in Cape Town. So that's the story. It's really a story of the narrow pathway that's available and how that's relationship driven. And and also, I guess it's also about the survivability of public broadcasting. Don't underestimate the strength of the European market and the surviving strength of the US market, even though, as Anne just said, a lot of buyers have dropped off. So that's kind of my story, Dan.
Well, you know, Peter, it's really interesting. Just curious, you kind of ran the table there, right? With, you know, you got Ruth with the thumbs up, then you get Terramata, and then you get WNET. I'm curious if you went out and bought a lottery ticket after you got the green light email. Kind of on a roll with that. Pretty great. But it is really nice, though, to hear, you know, their opportunities still do exist, as challenging as this can be. And there is no doubt that when you start looking at some of these bigger brands that we spoke about, you know, Anne's right, that, you know, their appetite for this mid-range natural history has largely disappeared, leaving the market to WNET for this type of content. Now, that's not to say there isn't premium natural history as we've described it. Some of these really high-end 7+ figures an hour production that are showing up on Netflix, they're showing up on Disney Plus, and that's a sort of maybe as a panel discussion unto itself. But finding a nice success story like your Pangolin film, Peter, is it offers a little hope and inspiration. And I think the other thing is that it's a relatively unknown producer coming into the system with the assistance of you, of Ruth Berry, of Terramata, ultimately with PBS that sort of come in. And I think it's a really good sign about the health of our business, even as we know we're all sort of faced with, you know, adaptive challenges with the use of technology. But, you know, in there's another sort of landscape within the US that's a little bit more modest. And I'm specifically thinking of two properties right now. One is Curiosity, and the other is Love Nature. Both of those have an appetite. Love Nature in particular has an appetite for natural history, but they're not necessarily the answer to all the questions, but they can be the answer to some of the questions. And what kind of experiences have you had with either of those services or other services of sort of a similar ilk? They're not sort of the traditional linear based services, but maybe a little bit newer brands into the market.
Yeah, I think when it comes to plain distribution of finished films, they're both good partners. With Blue Ant, I think it's a bit of a struggle for a producer, I would say, because if you approach them with a project or if you want them to finance your project, you know, they aim for a lot of rights. So you need to be prepared to really give up those rights. So you really have to ask yourself, what's your goal? You know, do you want to have a lot of public broadcasters on board so you have a huge audience? Or is it more important for you to get the film financed? And you can also team up, you know, with Blue Ant or someone like Curiosity. But they will end up taking a lot of rights, ideally, you know, but it's always up for negotiation. I'm not saying it's not very strict, but in general, like they want to have as many rights as possible, and that sort of limits it for distribution. So you need to really think about your goal, what you want to achieve with your film and your project. Both are very, you know, good clients in terms of, you know, that editorial angle, and we've been working with both of them on different deals, and yeah, I think they're really good partners. But yeah, like I said, you have to make that decision.
Yeah, I think that's been sort of a challenge even with some of the brands like Discovery and Disney, right? As they pivoted towards digital, it was an all rights sort of approach. And I think the good news in some ways for producers is that we're taking our foot off gas pedal with that as a model 100% of the time. And there's a little bit more flexibility in there. And it's great for the producers in some respects, right? Because you get some of those rights you can hold on to. Of course, the challenge is that you still have then a funding gap that you've got to work to fill. So it's there's sort of pros and cons on either model, but moving
it takes a long time to negotiate. I will say that yeah, but
well,
I mean, they're all open. I mean, it's not very strict or one-sided. So
and I think that's actually a really good point, though, because the idea that you brainstorm an idea on a topic to do on September 1st, you're not going to have a deal complete on September 15th and in production on September 30th, right? This goes back to relationships and time and patience on everybody's part in the ecosystem. Moving a little beyond the U.S., though, Anne, you clearly sort of have outlined how it's a bit of a challenge to get into the U.S. with a high volume of projects, right? There's a very limited appetite, but that's not as true around the world, and in particular in the heart of Europe, where there's still a very healthy bit of support from the public broadcasting realm. And you've had some success, really. You've talked about the public broadcasting support from Germany, a bit from France. UK also has some of this with select producers out of the UK. How important is it to sort of the health of the mid-range natural history program that these public broadcasters remain sort of in the picture and as active as they are?
Good question.
Yeah, I think it's really important to have to approach them all, even though it is tricky as well. So what I know, the producers that we work with from Germany, they will try to get the basic financing, which is more or less, something between 50 and 80% of the budget, I would say, from Germany, and then it makes it easier to bring others on board. Though I will say that, yeah, again, this is a bit tricky because pre-sales, it's usually tricky with broadcasters because you don't know who's doing the pre-sale. Is it the editorial team? Is it the buyer who also buys history, science, something else? So you need to be really, really careful about it. And I think what's most important, I mean, in natural history, everything's been more or less done. So you have to have the story straight, and I think that will open the doors to whoever you want. If you have a strong story, it's basically like Peter said, you have a strong story, you know exactly how the film is going to be, what's new, what hasn't been done. So I think those are the door openers, if you want, to the public broadcasting space that still existed. But if you do another, I don't know, Wild Italy, or something, Wild Places that we have seen so much, I think that's a bit trickier to do.
It's a bit more tricky. Yeah. One of the things that Anne, you had shared with me, and it wasn't scientific, so I'm not going to hold you to the numbers, but just you had commented on there really is a robust appetite, depending on how you want to define robust, for some of the natural history hours. And we were estimating between us, just sort of doing some back of the envelope math, it could be well above 50 plus hours within Germany itself when you add up the volume that each of the public broadcasters does. That's pretty good.
Yeah, I mean,
for the single territory.
Yeah, I mean, we do have that broad broadcasting system. So we have slots in every major channel, basically. But even there's a lot of talk and things happening. But overall, yes, we have more than one possibility. And, we have 5 or 6 channels, and they all need programs. So yes, but they will usually spend those hours on German production companies. So it may be wise to try and find one of them and go through them if you want to really reach that. Yeah.
Well, Dan, can I chip in and ask a question, Dan?
Yeah, fire away.
Yeah, I got one really big thought. We hear it's like the US Open is on now, so I'm thinking tennis. The game bounces between pure natural history and people-led natural history, with big human characters leading the story. Where's the balance now?
That's a whole panel, really. So we do have a lot of broadcasters on the pure distribution side again, you know, pure finished programs. So they're still very much into pure wildlife. They don't want to see people because they think, again, it's usually not natural history experts, you know, so they're working across the board, history, science, travel, and so that's a bit tricky, and that they usually tend to like pure wildlife films more. But I know that there are a lot of discussions, so I think that they may open up because programs are still needed, and if it's a strong story, then why not? I know that, you know, a few of them have been open.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I will say just anecdotally, I think you know, years ago, particularly in the U.S. marketplace, any personality on camera or even narration that was not with an American accent or an English original voice out of the UK or Australia, Canada, would have been a very difficult thing to place in the US. But as Netflix has almost really altered our viewing behavior, I'd say in the last 10 years or so. And I do think the American audience specifically, is a little bit more open to certain pieces being dubbed or you know, non-American accents, even in English, coming through, and they don't sort of recoil the way they once did. And I think as that becomes a little bit more prevalent, I think the obstacles that having a human character involved are gonna diminish over time. And we could probably also thank YouTube for that. I'm pretty confident of.
Yeah.
But well, before we wrap it up, Anne, anything you wanted to just sort of add on, you know, some areas that maybe we didn't get a chance to touch on? If maybe we'll get a chance to bring you back and do a part 2.
No, well, I think again, as long as there is a good story, we're all in a good spot, and that can also involve humans. So I think that's something to look out for.
Well,
I guess my last word, Dan,
yeah,
my last word would be, as Anne says, have a good story, back your relationships, you know, relationships that lead places, and work with, you know, really proven adults in the room, strong characters in the whole, you know, development and production process. And also never forget Europe as a key player in creating natural history programs. I guess they're my biggies.
yeah, and I think actually,
you.
Peter, some of the takeaways for me as well are pretty parallel. You know, there's a path forward without the U.S., and that is, I think, an evolution of the marketplace itself. As the U.S.'s appetite has diminished, the market's figuring out how to move forward without them, and still provide some pretty high quality content. And I think that's been one of the things. I think the other thing I would offer is I do think the market is right sizing itself a little bit. I think in some places we have a little bit more supply than we do demand. And of course, as that occurs, the funding will sort of follow accordingly. And eventually we're going to get to a place, I think, probably in the next 12 to 24 months, where you'll start to see supply and demand come back into play. And I think that'll work for both sides of the equation, both the buyer and the seller. But the biggest takeaway is to echo what both of you have said: relationships matter. Relationships, both today, yesterday, 3 years ago, 5 years ago, they matter. And with a not so shameless plug for Anne and Anne's side of the business, you know, not everybody can approach one of these key buyers directly. A distributor, particularly in today's world, really matters. And I don't say that just because Anne is here. I think it benefits her, but it really is an important thing. These distributors are the ones that are attending the markets, they're attending the festivals, but more importantly, they can get somebody on a Zoom call or a phone call, pop an email, and really get the lay of the land on something far easier than what an independent producer can do. So don't discount your relationships with distributors as well as commissioners and other producing partners. So with that, I want to thank Peter for allowing me to moderate and be the guest today. And
Dan, you're great.
Thank you for your sophomore appearance here with Documentary Business. We look forward to having you back again for continued discussion. And that's wrapping it up. Once again, this is Selling Natural History: Opportunities and Challenges. My name is Dan Salerno on behalf of Documentary Business. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you, Dan.
Thanks, Dan.